What does a youth baseball coach have to do with a then 11-year-old Josh Smith turning into the youngest master bladesmith of all time? Well, find out on this episode of the No Excuse to Miss podcast as Josh discusses how he went from master bladesmith to family-owned business to an American success story. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome back to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Volkortson, and I'm super excited about this week's guest. He is a master bladesmith, but not just a master bladesmith, but one of the youngest, if not the youngest, to ever receive the honor. And he has now taken that knife-making passion into a full-time business and even made it a family business with his wife coming on board as well. I would like to welcome to the show Josh Smith. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Scott.
I appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are running two different knife companies, so I do appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm honored to be on, honestly.
So let's get a little background. I believe you became a master bladesmith, was it at 19, or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, yep. A journeyman at 15 and a master bladesmith at 19.
So how did you get into knife making at such a young age?
I was a little league baseball player. I was 11, and the coach would bring knives to practice and show the dads. And he was just making kind of hunting knives at that point. And being a kid, I was just interested in knives he was making, and thought it was super cool and was always asking questions. And so my folks bought me one of his knives for Christmas that year. And then he invited me up to his shop to build one. So kind of took off from there.
And I think I read that there's and you can once again correct me if I'm wrong, but there's less than 200 master bladesmiths in the world. Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure. I haven't seen an updated list of where it's at exactly right now, but yes, that I'm pretty sure it's still under 200. I know there's when I got mine, I was somewhere around 100. Okay. I'm not really exactly sure which number when I passed, but yeah, it's definitely a limited number for sure.
That's impressive. So you did that, and then you started Josh Smith Knives, which has been around for considerably longer than your new company, Montana Knife Company.
Yeah. I really, from the time I was 11 and, up through, even still now, I operate my custom side under just my name, so any kind of custom knife that I make that's 100% made by me, for collectors or for whatever, that's under my name. But I started the second business because I wanted to make sure that I was kind of clear, for the customer's sake, we were kind of clear about what knives were what. So like, for example, if you buy a knife from me and it says, it's a Josh Smith knife, you don't want to find out that, maybe two of my employees worked on it and, I didn't do much on it. So, I kind of wanted some clarification there. And, the Montana Knife Company name, I think, has a cool ring to it. It's actually a name that I reserved when I was 19 years old. And I've had it for that long, planning on launching a company someday. And it definitely the Montana Knife Company is definitely more of the production style knife where I make all the prototypes. And then, I still do work on, the knives that are in here, but I also have employees here working on knives as well. So I'm sure it's like your guns, you're not hand sanding every stock of Volkortson firearms, but
correct.
I'm sure you definitely have your impact on, design and how the process works and what you want for a finished product. It's the same here.
Absolutely. And, I assume like the Montana Knife Company allows you to scale it something a little bit different than what you can do with the Josh Smith knives.
Yeah. And that's really why I wanted to start this was, one person can just only make so many knives, and it's real similar in the gun world with your people. I mean, there's custom gun makers out there right now that are making, $10,000 and $20,000 guns that, are carved stocks and engraved and inlaid and the whole 9 yards. Right. But, two things. One, I wanted to be able to produce more knives, but I also wanted to be able to produce them at a price point where, your average, man or woman could buy one of our knives and get a good quality knife, but also be able to afford it and not be afraid to use it. My customs are, fairly expensive from, in the, $1,500 or so up into the tens of thousands of dollars. So, just like in the gun world, you've got your guns out there that are, $10,000, but your average hunter is not going to take that and go elk hunting or varmint hunting,
Right. And I know personally, I never knew how much work went into like forging a custom knife until I was able to watch you work your craft, and obviously that was a very, quick or limited introduction that I got to that. But watching what you guys do, there is a lot of man hours that goes into one of your forged knives. So yes, they're expensive, but when you break it down, like you said, there's only so many hours in a month that you can work on a knife, and there is a lot of time and a lot of experience to know the different metal workings and all the different tricks of the trade to be able to get to one of your finished knives.
Yeah. And it's, that is kind of the hard part business wise of being a custom knife maker, and making a living at it. You spend so much time working on one piece, and, especially as they get more complicated, it's kind of a scary thing where, you can I've done this where I've put 2 or 3 weeks of work into a blade and then end up with a problem or end up with an issue or screw it up. And you lose all that time. So, you could spend all this time making this Damascus steel and doing all the forging and grinding and polishing and all this, and go to heat treat the blade and maybe it cracks, or something like that. Or your hand material you've been carving on, you come out to the shop the next day and the piece of fossilized ivory, has a crack in it. So some of those things are in your control, and, screw ups happen, but some of them aren't. And it's just a tough way to make a living. The people who are, artists out there, they say starving artists for a reason. And, some people are successful at it, but it's definitely a tough way to go, and I was full time at that for about 10 years. But then I had 4 kids and actually the economy in 2008, when that started kind of taking a dive, and by 2010, my custom order list was from a 3-year backlog down to, it felt like, just a few months. And, so it's kind of a scary way to make a living. You're always kind of wondering.
Yes. And I know that you worked in conjunction with being a full-time knife maker. You were also a lineman up until recently.
Yeah.
How was that to go from, just for the reasons you just mentioned, where an economy crashes and all of a sudden people can't buy $5,000 or $10,000 custom knives. And, you mentioned you have 4 kids. So how was that from like a mental shift or a mindset shift for you to be able to go from the security of your lineman job to going all in on the knife making business?
Well, it's kind of been a bit of a pendulum, when I was a full-time, custom maker, when I actually took that job, which, it wasn't that job exactly. I got hired on with the power company and then got an apprenticeship and worked my way up through. But, after kind of the whole custom stuff for 10 years, I think I was ready for a break from kind of the uncertainty of that and the stress of that. And when I got that job with, a local utility, it was really nice, like stress relief to know that you've got, paid vacation and 401k and health insurance and just a check that's going to come in every 2 weeks, no matter what, So it was definitely a nice thing to have. And for the next 8 or 10 years, 10 years, I guess, I was a lineman became a lineman, and I was making knives on the side. But after I do that for a while, I was definitely like just feeling that itch and that burn to get back, because the knife making is really my passion. Like that's what I love doing. And I also had this idea of this company that I wanted to launch. And I thought if I ever went back into the knives full time, it would be, I'd go at it different. You know, I've learned, you know, from some of my mistakes, and I felt like I had a model that if I could implement correctly would work, and I could make a good living, and maybe even a better living than, you know, being a lineman. I wouldn't have to be a starving artist. So yeah, my wife actually, you know, she was really the big catalyst for getting all this stuff going. Cause when I met her a few years ago, she kind of was the one providing me that time. You know, I was a single dad for a while, and just doing the dad thing. And, she was the one that when I met her was like, I got things in the house, I got things taken care of, like get to your shop, you know, get to work. And when I was telling her about this idea of this knife company, she's just like, well, let's do it. Let's go. And, so she was actually, for the last probably at least a year, has been telling me I should have quit my job, you know, and kept telling me you should quit and do this. And it's like, well, I don't want to be reckless with our family situation. And finally, after I launched MKC and it was taken off so much, it just got to the point last December where it's like, okay, I got to quit, you know? So, you know, it was definitely a stressful decision, but I don't know if it was really as stressful as it was exciting, because it felt like we were kind of ready to go, you know?
Well, and I know you know, just from even watching your social media or watching the Montana Knife Company's social media, I think it's cool to see like how actively involved your entire family is, your kids, your wife, you know, and a lot of that reminds me of, you know, kind of our family growing up where we were out, you know, and I see like your kids boxing up knives, you know, it brings back memories of us doing very similar.
Yeah.
Which was the one thing that, you know, and we've grown a little bit since then, but that was the one thing that we always thought was kind of neat, was the family business aspect where, you know, it was like just our immediate family that was doing the work. So there was a lot of, I don't want to say additional pride, but a different type of pride than like what we have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's definitely been something that's just really cool. This last year here is, you know, when we have our drops of knives that are available and we sell them, and having, well, not only just the drops, but like the, you know, as we're making the knives, you know, my kids come out, you know, a lot like when I was a kid. I grew up in an excavation business, and my parents paid me to work, you know, and, you know, so I was learning a trade, plus I was earning money. So I was pretty happy. And, you know, my kids come out and they fill out their little timesheet, they clock in, like, and I think it makes them feel like kind of like an adult as well. They do the same thing that the couple employees I have now. You know, back when we were doing that here 6 months ago, I didn't really have much for employees. So it was just them. And they would, you know, fill out their little timesheet, and then they'd put handles together and do work out there. And then, like you say, the packaging, the boxing, my 11-year-old girl loves to wrap the knives up and package them up in boxes and put the labels on. And, you know, even when you get the end of the box is kind of written on what color it is or what model. And a lot of times it looks like an 11-year-old wrote it, because it was an 11-year-old.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, so it's really cool. And obviously the goal would be, as they become young adults and further into adulthood, that we've grown to a point where we can bring them on, and they want to, like, if they want to go off and do their own thing and have their own dreams, that's perfectly fine with me. But, you know, if they can be an asset to our company and want to work with me, I think that would be, you know, I think that's would be almost anyone's dream, to have your family be able to, you know, work with you.
Yes. And one thing I learned from you, I heard you say this on another podcast, and it resonated with me, and it kind of changed the way I look at things, is, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact quote, but you talked about how our kids are capable of much more than many of us think they are.
Yeah.
And I know, you know, like I said, I've learned this from you, watching you, you know, with your son driving, you know, heavy equipment and different things. And it's challenged me to get much better at trusting my kids are going to be okay if they go do this.
Yeah.
So, I want to circle back around a little bit with the family. Is I know that several years, I don't know the time frame, you had a fire that actually took down your house.
Right.
And I remember you saying that you and your 4 kids were actually living in a motorhome. So do you think that was somewhat the catalyst of, or it kind of propelled you to where you're at now, wanting to build this business with them in mind?
Yeah, I'll actually jump on that other one first.
Okay.
I feel pretty strongly in that, and that's, I think it was kind of the way my parents raised me, where, when I was a kid, I was operating backhoes, and I mean, quite honestly, by the time I was in high school, I was taking, a backhoe and a truck, and I was going one direction and going and running a job and actually working on a job and, digging a basement or building a road or doing whatever. And, my dad was always really good about, just, I mean, I look back on it now, like he just said, here's what we need to do, go do it. And, I didn't always get it right. I mean, sometimes he'd have to come in and fix things, but he gave me the freedom to kind of fail. And obviously you don't want to set your kid up, to be hurt really bad in a bad situation. And, for example, like with guns, I mean, you're not going to just hand a kid a gun that's never handled one and tell them to go shoot it. But that being said, if you train your kid right about the safety of a gun and all this different stuff, I mean, like my boy now, he's 12 or 13, and totally fine with him taking his 22 out and going out into the woods and trying to shoot gophers or squirrels or whatever he wants to do. And same thing with I just encourage parents, like, man, don't be afraid to let your kid go into a weld shop or somewhere where they're making stuff and learn from somebody else. You might be a doctor or work at a tire shop or whatever, but maybe try to expose your kid if you know somebody in your area that does something cool. If your kid can be responsible and listen and follow direction, let them go try stuff and let them, my parents, God, I was 11. And then shortly thereafter, like when I was 12, I bought a belt grinder and I had equipment in my shop. And, did I have some close calls? Yeah. Yeah. Probably my parents probably wouldn't have been happy about, but, really I'd go out to my little knife shop and work, and I was unattended and not being watched. But I think it was also gave me a sense of like making me feel like I was an adult, and older, because it gave me some pride that like I can do this. And they also used it against me, if I was going to get in trouble, or, they would always tell me, you get in trouble, we're going to lock up that shop of yours, so they used it as a way to also kind of make sure that, I knew that could all go away if I wasn't a good kid,
And we've seen that even with some competitive shooters as younger kids. They weren't necessarily like great students. And there was even one story. I had a guy that I know whose son, he got into trouble and did stuff. And the only thing that kind of kept him on the straight and narrow was, as long as he didn't get in trouble, he got to go to the range that night or that weekend, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But it was that one thing that completely turned this kid around from somebody that was struggling a little bit to.
I think that's really with a lot of kids. You got to find something that they're passionate about. And I mean, I was that kid in school. I wasn't the, most well-behaved kid. And I also could give a shit about algebra and, and why do I need to learn this? And so, I got B's and C's, and I got just good enough grades to keep my parents kind of off my butt. I could have definitely done better in school had I applied myself, but I think there's a ton of kids that are in school right now that just, I think especially with boys, I think we're really, you go back, generations, we're really meant to be 12 years old and outside running around and hunting stuff and learning how to be, providers. And I think that's kind of in our DNAs. And I think in certain kids, maybe it's a little stronger in their DNA, and we were never really built to sit in a classroom 8 hours a day, and sit still. And so I see people say, oh, this kid's ADHD or whatever. And I'm sure there is some of that, but more often than not, I think there's a lot of kids, one, that just need a little ass whipping. And number two, they're bored and they need something that they can latch onto and be proud of and strive for. And, and you can use that as a parent. Like I say, maybe a lot of kids at sports, hey, if you don't get this certain grade, you're not going to practice and you're not playing. But that doesn't really work for every kid, So,
and there's some kids, and it sounds like you were definitely this way, that they don't necessarily enjoy sitting in a classroom being lectured to, but you put them in a shop where they can work with their hands or learn like more in an apprentice style.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like you did. And,
for sure.
The world completely changes for them.
Yeah. And I think we've definitely all seen those kids where, yeah, they're just a little pill at school, but if it's something they're interested in and want to do, and I mean, I've had those kids come by here and stuff, and, they kind of have a reputation of being, kind of little peckerheads at school. And, man, you get a kid that's like really interested in making a knife. I guarantee you, I could have that kid in my shop for 8 hours and he'd be nothing but a little hard charger and do exactly what you want,
Yeah.
And I think that's really why, on a bigger scale, and you can get into the politics stuff or political or whatever, but like I think on a larger scale, we really need to provide more of the trade school type opportunities in high school, and I know they have one here in Montana at one school. They have a machining program, and the guy I got to tour the guy's shop that owns Proof Rifles.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the Proof rifle barrels. And he took us through there, and we were discussing, kind of ramping up production and growth, and how do you, from a Montana knife company, and, how do you find machinists and people like that? And he suggested hiring kids, literally seniors in high school, right out of that high school program as a machinist. He says he's hired several with no college. And he said they've got a basis in knowledge. They don't want to go to college. They're excited about what, like say Proof is doing, and they can be trained by, more experienced machinists they already have. But I found it interesting that, the reason I bring him up is I find it interesting because he talks about, this high school and how good their training is, and the fact that they're hiring 18, 19-year-old kids right out of school into a career. And it's like, well, why aren't we doing more of that as a society? Why aren't there high schools that are, right around you or right around Remington, or I don't know, pick whatever company you want. We should be given, or maybe it's welding, and it's going out and pipelining right out of high school. We just know there's some kids in high school that just aren't going to go get a 4-year degree and, do the kind of the conventional process of college, especially with the expense. And so it feels like as a society, we should definitely be pushing, whether it's mechanics or robotics or, or more of the trade stuff. But that's kind of my own little rant. And it feels like as if our government's going to be putting, writing checks and blowing money, that would be a phenomenal place to put it,
I would agree. I had a conversation with a gentleman in Florida, and he said, like, the skilled tradesmen, like even plumbers or electricians, different jobs like that. He said, like, down where he lives in Florida, it's no longer, what are you going to charge me for that? It's, can you come do it?
Yeah.
He said, because they're so few and far between. He goes, I can get, computer stuff done all day. I can get this done all day. But he's like, when it comes to a skilled trade, like, let's say plumbing or being an electrician, he's like, we just don't have them down here. So he said, if we find somebody, you don't even dare ask for an estimate. You just say, okay, when can you be here?
Right.
Which goes back to your point.
It's real similar with, I had a vehicle that needed fixed, just some mechanic work done on it. And here like a month ago, and I was calling all over trying to find a mechanic that just had an opening. And every single mechanic you call is literally weeks out on working on a vehicle. And so it's similar where it's like I was less worried about their reputation and just if the guy had an opening,
Which is such a reversal from where we were, 20, 30, even 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know all these places, when you talk to them, all are looking to hire really just about anybody, but especially somebody that's got any kind of experience and work ethic. And, if we could be given, kids in high school a little bit of experience, I think that's all a business owner really, really wants, is just somebody with just a little bit of experience or knowledge as a basis, and a baseline.
We always look at it that way, that for many of the jobs that we have, if they have a little bit of skill or, even just some mechanical aptitude, if they had the right attitude towards wanting to learn and get better, we can teach them many of the skills they need, to excel with us.
Right.
But it's just they got to have some of that hands-on experience, and, some of the machining, we will send our guys to school and different things, but for the most part, if we can find the right person, we can teach them what we're looking for.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with all that. So I guess getting to your next question was about the house burning down. Yeah. So, we did, I actually, when that happened, I was, I live in a small town kind of outside of Missoula, and there's not much for rentals. And, I knew I was going to have to be rebuilding. But I didn't want to rent a house 20 miles from where I was going to be building, because I knew I'd be working on my house, every night, late at night and early in the morning. So, I bought a fifth wheel actually. And, I didn't even have a fifth wheel hitch for a pickup. So I had a friend of mine bring it out, and we parked it here in the driveway. And, I actually dug into my old sewer system for the house that had burned down and just ran a sewer line right over to the camper. And, yeah, so my kids and I lived in that all summer while we built the house. And, I don't know about the correlation to the knife company necessarily, but more about like just the kind of resilience and attitude of life when shit goes wrong. And, I told my kids, obviously everybody was kind of devastated and bummed out, and they'd lost their stuff and whatnot. But also, like I told them, I said, there's a lot of people that would love to camp in Montana for an entire summer. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to camp out and we're going to build a beautiful home, and everything's going to be fine. And, I guess that's more of hopefully my lesson for them is like, even at the worst, like try to find some good in the situation or some way that you can make it good and, turn a bad, really bad situation into, maybe kind of a cool learning experience down the road, and so that's what we did. We built a home, and, that happened in March, and, by Thanksgiving, we had a home mostly done, and we were living in it. So,
and I would guess that's one of those lessons that they learned from you, that even if they were too young at the time to appreciate what you did and the attitude that you took on with it.
Yeah.
That as they become adults and they grow and encounter issues in their, hardships in their own life, that they'll always be able to draw upon how you treated that summer.
Yep. I hope so. And it was funny, like, down at this Total Archery Challenge event in Park City, we had a big wind come through one night and kind of destroyed a lot of people's tents. Just the vendor area just kind of got annihilated a bit. And, our tent was one of them that broke, and a guy, I wasn't up there. It was later on in the evening, probably 10, 11 at night. And, this guy shows up and he's like, "Hey man, like your tent's gone, like everything's gone, from this wind." And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he was looking at me like it was going to be like this terrible thing. And I was like, well, we'll deal with it in the morning. And he's like, well, gosh, you don't even seem that upset. And I was like, dude, I had a house burned down, like my little vendor tent blown away at a fun, cool event that I get to be at is just not really a big deal. And he's like, that's a great attitude. And I was like, yeah, let's have a beer, we'll deal with it in the morning. And we did. We went up there and kind of figured it out and got things kind of set back up, patched back together. But hopefully, I do hope that my kids will be able to look at things, and instead of turning everything into, really, unless somebody's died or critically injured, like, life moves on, we'll be fine,
Yes. And I would say that you do that as well as anybody, and I'm sure they have learned from that. And I'm sure it applies. I know your kids are all very big into sports, which can be difficult when you lose a game or whatever, have a bad performance. But, when you can put everything in perspective like you did with that vendor tent blowing away, it comes down to it's just a game, or it's just one game or one performance.
Right.
It's like you said, nobody died, nobody got critically injured. Life goes on, and how do we learn and get better from it?
Yep. No, I totally agree. And I think part of that did come from being a knife maker and having some of those big kind of screw up moments. And I remember actually talking, I mean, this just kind of jogs my memory on this, but I remember talking to an older knife maker, who's kind of a mentor of mine. And we were actually talking about another guy that like has an issue on a blade or something. He'll just get super pissed and just like throw the knife across the shop and throw a fit. And, really when you're in the kind of business that we're in, same as you that you're in, like there's going to be things that don't quite go right. And I think you just kind of have to expect that, not that you want that. And obviously you try to put procedures in to prevent that. But I think having that, like, well, yep, that's a screw up. Like, what are we going to do? And actually one of the guys in my shop, when we were doing this veterans forging thing this weekend, he was making some Damascus and he was almost done with it. And he was using my rolling mill, which, it's not his piece of equipment. He's not used to it. And he went to roll this piece of steel in, and he got it, like he was making a square bar, and he got it turned at a 45, and he accidentally sucked it in there at a bit of an angle and kind of squashed the end of his steel and really kind of messed up what he was doing. And he wanted to just chop it off and then just move forward with less steel. But I was like, man, that amount of steel is like a whole knife blade that down the road, when this thing becomes a knife, like that's an entire knife that you're just kind of going to be throwing away. And so I actually, like, he wanted to just do it right then and there. I'm like, well, let's pause for a second, look at this and talk about it. We kind of discussed some options and decided that we can just take it back down to a smaller square bar and chop it into more pieces and restack it all up and just change our plan, change our design that we were making. And in the end, it'll actually be, even cooler, and I think, and that's what I told him. I'm like, man, when you have a screw up in your shop like that, don't just keep going on it for like, take a break for a second, like maybe go have lunch or whatever, and like come back at it and really consider all options,
Yeah, because I know, we've had that happen in our shop where you make that quick decision based on emotion.
Yeah.
And it's not usually the right one.
Right.
And that was something I learned from my dad. Is he used to have troubles, he'd mess something up in the shop when I was a kid. And when he was younger, he would do the thing where probably lose his temper and all that. But as he got older, he would walk away, like you said, go have lunch, go have dinner, and then come back and attack at a different time or a different day.
Yeah. Yeah. And your mindset really does, it's a powerful thing. Like, I don't know, whether it's momentum or mindset or whatever, but like I've had stuff where I've done this, where I just make a little mistake and it's like, oh, and keep going and make another one. And it does seem to snowball. And then I have had those times where I'm just go in, go to bed and all pissed off, and then come out the next morning and like, it's like the answer is just clear right in front of your face. Like, oh, I could do this and do that, and off you are rolling and just fine, so that fresh outlook's definitely good.
And I would imagine that, a lot of those lessons you've learned and that perspective has probably been very valuable as you've built Montana Knife. Because the one thing that I marvel at is how fast your company has like grown, it seems like, from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
You launched it, I think you said, a little over a year ago. And now, you guys are at many of the Total Archery Challenges. We've been down at Winter Strong a couple times together. And it seems like you're at a lot of these different events and you do a great job like networking, meeting people, and doing different things. Is that something that comes easy to you, or is that something you have to work at? And the reason I ask that is a lot of times I know like guys that are used to being in the shop don't necessarily like to get out and do some of these events.
Yeah, I think that really comes from being a kid and going to knife shows and being like the young kid in the room with a bunch of adults, like grown men, like literally my heroes, that I was looking at their stuff at knife magazines, and going there and having to go there. There was no YouTube. So like I couldn't just learn what I wanted to learn on YouTube in the comfort of my own home. I had to go talk to people, and I was a kid and had to go ask some big scary, bearded man how he did something on his knife. And sometimes 90% of the time, especially being a kid, the guy'd be super nice about it and answer my questions and spend all the time I needed to learn. But there were those times where it was like, hey, beat it, kid, basically, and don't have time for it. And so I do I have thought a little bit about that, because like I am fairly comfortable going into a situation where I don't know people and just trying to kind of, meld into the group and become a part of the group and talk to people. And I do think that was because I kind of had to do that as a kid if I wanted to learn what I wanted to learn. That's I do like people, and I like being around people, but especially people who are I don't know, like if it's accomplished or good at what they do, like even if it's not what I'm looking to do, like I don't plan on making guns, but I love the opportunity to be able to hang out with somebody like you who has built a company who, in my mind is doing a lot of what we want to do as a knife company, where you're building, a really nice product. You're not trying to build like the cheapest gun out there that you can possibly have at Walmart. But you're building a solid company where employees enjoy working for you, and it's sustainable. And so if I see somebody doing something like that, I'll try to correlate it to what I want to do, even if it's not the exact same industry, and try to really pick people's brains and steal ideas from guys here and there, and whether it's marketing stuff that maybe it's Bert Zorn's doing in a weightlifting, exercise equipment company. So,
and that's what I always try to look at guys like you or similar and see what can I learn from them, or what ideas can I steal from them to make us better. And I know the one that stands out to me, and I've seen this multiple times with knife makers, is it seems like you guys are all genuinely very happy with promoting each other's work.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the way it is with, probably not all knife makers, but the ones that I've encountered or the ones that I've been around, I've always marveled at how you guys are so willing to promote and praise other people's work, which is very uncommon to me. At least I know we don't see a lot of that in our industry, or a lot of other industries. It always seems to be cutthroat, but you guys don't seem to have that.
Yeah. And that was always the way, I think that came from some of the guys that really kind of brought bladesmithing back from kind of the dead back in the 70s. And a lot of those guys, there's really just a handful of men back then that were starting to kind of try and figure some of this stuff out. And they had to work with each other and like share with each other their ideas. And I think as they went to different places and taught, and as the knife world grew, I know that's how, like, the guys I was involved with that I learned from were doing that with each other, where they were constantly on the phone or getting together and discussing back and forth, like, hey, I did this and this worked, and what do you think about this? And they were sharing ideas and telling each other how they did something. And it brought up the entire collective ability of those knife makers by working together and there definitely were, a few guys that I've run into over the past that just didn't want to tell, like say somebody like me who was, I don't know, quote unquote, a rising star or whatever, when I was like 18, 19, right? They could see that I was getting pretty good, but maybe I still wasn't as good as they were. And I would ask something and, basically it was like, I could tell sometimes even the answers I got were kind of BS. But those are the guys that are pretty easy to pass, because they also kind of have the ego that they won't ask someone else how they did it. They'll act like they already know it, which costs them, because, if they were just working back and forth with people and being good about it, they would actually learn a lot as well. So I think the knife community has kept that, and I do hope that it keeps that. It's definitely grown a lot, and now there is the internet, and there's Instagram, and there's amazing knife makers that I see on Instagram that I've never even heard of or met. Where back in the 90s and 2000s, I pretty much knew everyone. But it's been cool to see that even with the invention of YouTube and Instagram and all that, it does seem like these knife makers are still keeping that whole kind of sharing piece alive and rooting each other on. Guys like, whether it's Lucas at Grizzly Forge or Neil Kamamura or Mareko Malmasi, just all these different people that we just kind of keep rooting each other on.
Which, like I said, it caught me. That's one thing that stood out the first time I watched you and Neil Forge, is how complimentary you were to each other. And, many times you even explain, like, as you guys were doing it, the differences of, this is my approach. He does it a little bit differently like this. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just a different approach to how to do something.
Right.
But that, like I said, that was a huge takeaway for me, because I grew up with, a lot of the gunsmiths. They probably could have shortened their learning curve if they were more willing to ask questions and talk to people and share their secrets. But many of them were so secretive that they were afraid somebody else was going to steal their idea or, do whatever with it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's only to me, there's only so many as a custom maker, and that's really what we're talking about. I don't know that all the sharing and whatnot goes on as much in the production world, in the big, like, corporate world. I mean, I doubt if the person who owns Gerber calls Benchmade and asks them how they're doing something in their production process. I doubt there's going to be a lot of sharing that goes on at that level, but I do know down at the custom level, it's just, I don't know. It's pretty incredible. And my thing is that there's only so many knives that I can make and sell. And also most of my collectors, that buy my knives have other people's knives anyway. And so they're really buying the people as much as they are the knives. But I would venture to guess that 80% of Volquartsen firearms customers have another brand of gun as well.
Yes.
Like, they don't just have one gun. And I would also guess that a lot of the people that buy your guns are buying your company and your people and you as much as they are also buying the gun. Whether they meet you at a trade show or they follow you on Instagram and watch what you're doing, and I definitely have had, people where I post a knife up on Instagram or through an email or whatever. And I've had people at knife shows walk up, not really ask me anything about my background or get to know me at all. And they pick up a knife and how much is it? And you tell them and they buy it and they walk off and there's no personal connection. But I'd say that's definitely not the norm.
And I would say it even more so with the way people are able to get acquainted with a customer or with a company or the people behind the company in today's world with Instagram and all the social media, that it's even more important that they're buying, the people at the company as much as they are the product anymore.
No, I agree. And I think that's one thing that's helping us. And it's something that I've always kind of thought would be important is I think it's really cool to people when they can get to know the actual owner or owners behind the brand. If you actually got to like meet the owner of Chevrolet, right? I mean, I know it's a publicly traded company, but let's say some big brand, you got to actually meet the owner of Nike or Microsoft. You got to hang out with Bill Gates, right? Like to me, that would be, people would think that's cool, especially when they were smaller brands. Anytime people meet the people behind the brand and get to know them, and then they walk away and like, oh, that Scott guy's pretty cool. Like, I'm gonna really keep an eye on his work just because he's a cool guy and maybe has similar values that I do. It's always neat when you meet people, whether it's celebrities or whoever else, that you meet them and you come to find out, I don't know, in this world, maybe it's just being cynical, but you just kind of assume that a lot of these people are, arrogant or bigger than life or whatever. And then you meet him and it's like, God, he's just a regular guy, Yeah. So if they own a brand of some kind, you're going to want to naturally support that brand.
100%. And that was something I was going to ask you a little bit. Does it seem like surreal to you, like how fast Montana Knife Company has grown and like some of the people that you've been able to build knives for? And, I know like last year during the election cycle, you were up in an event, with Don Jr. and different politicians that way, just little things like that.
Yes.
In such a, I guess such a short time, relatively speaking. I know you've been doing knives forever, but building up MKC that quickly, does it seem surreal?
Yeah, it's wild, honestly. And, I've got a phenomenal business partner in this thing with Brandon Horaho, and I got to give him a lot of credit as well, because he's really doing a lot of the marketing side, whether, with the Instagram and the website and all that stuff. And both of him and I both are kind of in lockstep on how important it is to have good relationships and build relationships with people. And, but he and I both, really pinch ourselves quite often with like, it's actually interesting. Sometimes we have to talk ourselves back down to earth a little bit, because sometimes we've, here lately we'll be frustrated because, we're not moving quick enough on a certain knife project, or things aren't going quite how we want them to be going, because we have all these ideas and we're trying to push. And then we're like, hang on, could you have imagined back in November that we'd even be discussing even the possibility of doing this, and we have to kind of check ourselves and be like, we're fine. We're growing just fine, but yeah, it's definitely surreal, and it's super exciting. And it's also very motivating because, you've kind of got the tiger by the tail or the world by the tail, and you don't also want to screw it up. That's where it's hard for me to sit around and really bask in it as much as like worry about like, God, I can't screw this up, which keeps you motivated to, keep pushing forward. And, also it's kind of that feeling of, we have so many amazing people like yourself and a lot of our mutual friends that have helped us push it forward, that we don't, I personally don't want to let anyone down or disappoint anyone. Like, man, we thought they were going to be good, or we thought they got it, but boy, they sure screwed that up.
Well, I know from where I sit, it's fun watching how fast you guys have grown and the products that every time you guys do a drop, it seems like it sells out in, faster than the previous drop.
Yeah.
Which is, so fun from where I'm sitting to watch, knowing what good guys you and Brandon are, and how you're doing things. It's, so congratulations to the both of you guys.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's, it's amazing. I don't know, it feels like we've just had, I don't know, we've been really lucky to have so much help. So many amazing people. It's interesting. I had a guy comment a while back, something about, gosh, you guys must be paying a lot of money in marketing to a lot of different people. And, cause we've had some, fairly high profile people sharing our stuff and, carrying our knives. And it's like, actually we're not really paying anyone. Everyone's just being super kind and just getting on board, with what we're doing. And yeah, we send some knives out to some of our people and, gift those out because one, we want people to know how much we appreciate, our knives. And number two, I think that's some of the best form of marketing that you can do is we could spend $10,000 next month on, Instagram ads and probably get a certain return. Well, actually we couldn't do Instagram ads because we're not allowed to, because we make weapons.
Yeah, I can relate.
Scary knives. You know what that's like. But, we could spend 10 grand doing that, or we could send out, 10 grand worth of knives, which would be a lot, and probably get way more out of that.
Well, I think the one thing too is, a lot of those high profile people that are carrying your knives, I'm sure they're getting knives sent to them from other companies as well. Yeah. So it still speaks volumes to the quality of the product and the people behind it, that they're willing to go out and organically share that this is the knife I'm carrying, or this is the one I'm using on this hunt.
Yeah. And that's why it honestly kind of amazes me each time that somebody does post our knife or talks about it and takes the time to put together an Instagram story or post, because, I know that, I don't know, pick a name, Jim Miller, a UFC fighter or somebody like that. I know that they get stuff from other places. And so, it's hard for me to convey how much I appreciate that when I don't care if there's a famous person or if it's just a customer of ours that actually bought the knife. When people take the time to do that and share out what we're doing, it's hard to actually get across. Like when I say thank you to, you or Bert or whoever else, like it just doesn't seem like it's enough, but there's definitely a huge level of appreciation, for on our end for people that are doing that,
Well, and like I said, I appreciate our friendship, and I said I'd only take an hour of your time, so I don't want to keep you any longer. But quickly before we go, where's the best place that people can follow you? And, we'll post this in the show notes as well, but where should they go to follow you to learn more about both Josh Smith Knives as well as the Montana Knife Company?
Yeah. My personal Instagram is just, at Josh Smith Knives. And I've also got, Facebook. And then, Montana Knife Company, same thing, just at Montana Knife Company on Instagram. And then montanaknifecompany.com, joshsmithknives.com. It's pretty easy. So, nothing too fancy there, but my Josh Smith Knives page, Brandon and I are actually talking about kind of rebuilding that site and updating it a little bit. I don't have much available on there ever, just because I'm putting all my efforts into the MKC. When you go to MKC's site, it's mostly sold out all the time, but we are doing drops. We actually have, I don't know when this podcast will air, but it'll probably be gone by that point, but we do have a drop tonight of a new model that we're doing, our Stonewall. And but what I encourage people to do is just bear with us. The being sold out so fast is awesome, and it's a bit of an internal struggle because we have a lot of people that message and they're like, dude, you don't ever have anything on your site. This kind of sucks. And we hate to lose people because they're frustrated by that, but also in the same sense, like it's really cool that we're selling things so fast. But the goal, I do tell people that, and they do ask, like, the goal is to have knives available on our site. And so, you know what it's like when you're growing so fast. If you come out with a new model of gun, it's hard to go make 1,000 of them when you're not sure if you can even sell 100 of them. And so, that all takes money and time and effort to produce. And so we're trying to gauge numbers, and, we've been unbelievably blessed that we're selling what we're selling. Cause when we started making the numbers of knives that we're making, I thought we were making plenty,
Well, I'm sure there's something there too that, I'm sure there's a faster, more economical way to make a knife, but then that all starts to come at a sacrifice to the quality that you put into each one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had so many people tell me in the knife world, like, hey, you can have this done overseas or that done overseas. And like literally, with the numbers of knives that we've sold, and the cost difference of having a lot of that stuff made, like you guys can make way more money and produce way more knives, and whatnot. And my answer is always just like, I just don't even want to discuss it. Like, it's just not an option. So if it takes a little bit longer to make it American made, and obviously we want to ramp up our business, and get to where we're doing more and more of our own work in-house, on some of the certain processes, that'll help cut down some of the lead times of getting, blades in or materials in, but it's just a process of growing.
So what he's saying is the next time you guys see a drop from him, get on there right at the launch because they go quickly.
Yeah. I feel bad. Like, it's a little awkward sometimes where like we literally have people that go on and buy a hat just so their credit card information is saved. So when they want a knife, they can just click like the instant click to buy button.
Well, that is an awesome problem to have.
But we're working on that. I mean, we've definitely ramped up the numbers of what we're doing. And like come this fall and winter, we have a lot of stuff coming of what we've already made. And then we also have, new models of new stuff coming. So we just, what it's like as well as anyone. I mean, you would, I'm sure as you guys were growing, you'd love to have, all these different models of guns all at the same time. And it's the same way with knives. Like there's all kinds of different knives we'd love to make, but you kind of have to sell these to pay for those, and just grow slow.
And that's what, we have found that, our growth has been very slow and very steady, but I wouldn't change it for the world to do what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So, and it's easy to get caught up in the, wanting to mass produce something or take advantage of everything that's coming in right now. But I always try to look at things from a long-term perspective of, is that just a short-term gain and going to be a long-term loss? Or is that something we can sustain and we'll be happy about 5 or 10 years from now?
Well, honestly, we have some knives of some new models that we had planned on launching earlier here this fall. And, we haven't said anything about them, haven't put out any information about them because I was wanting to make sure we do them right. And sure enough, the other day, we kind of had some issues and we had to actually step backwards with them. And it's a real bummer that's going to set us back a couple months, but it's one of those deals where it's like, I'd rather wait 2 extra months and maybe we miss a big sales day on the year, a Black Friday or whatever, but I'd rather set that back 2 months, but make sure that when we come out with what we're trying to make, that they're right and and that in itself will pay off in the end, so
yes, it will.
We're definitely growing fast, Instagram followers and all that stuff. And we're selling what we're making quickly, but we're also, trying to make sure that if we come out with new models of knives, they're correct instead of just coming out with them just for the sake of trying to make the dollar right now,
When I think long term, that will definitely pay dividends for you.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Once again, I want to say thank you for taking the time. I know how busy you are, so I do appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And I want to thank you guys for listening. And as always, if you ever have any questions or suggestions, please hit us up at podcast@volkortson.com. We appreciate all the feedback, good or bad. Thank you and have a good day.